have you join me on the news. The headline says China's youngest astronauts launch into space. United Nations Security Council rejects two Gaza peace proposals. 22 dead, dozens injured in main mass shooting. Russia holds extensive nuclear retaliation drills, and Indonesia readies for February 2024 polls. China's youngest ever crew of astronauts have taken off on a 6-month mission to its space station in a rising space program that sets to send people to the moon by 2030. On Thursday morning, the crew of the Shenzhou 17 hauled up on a Long March 2F rocket from the Jiuquan Satellite Launch Center in northwest China at 11:14 a.m. The crew of 3 is chaired by 48-year-old former Air Force pilot Tang Hobu, who joined the People's Liberation Army in 1995 and was on the first crew mission to the space station known as the Tiangong in 2021. The other astronauts, known as taikonauts in China, are Tang Shengji, 33, and Jiang Jinling, 35, who are on their first journey to space. The all-male crew is the youngest ever to man a mission to the space station, with an average age of 38. After the rocket had been airborne for about 15 minutes, a space program official proclaimed the launch a complete success. Under President Xi Jinping, China's space dream has gone into overdrive. The world's second largest economy has pumped billions of dollars into its military-run space program in an attempt to catch up with the United States and Russia. Completed in late 2022, Tiangong can house a maximum of 3 astronauts at an orbital altitude of up to 450 kilometers, 280 miles, with an operational lifespan of over 15 years. The Shenzhou 17 astronauts will replace the Shenzhou 16 crew, who arrived at Tiangong at the end of May and will return to Earth on October 31st. Beijing targets to send a crewed mission to the moon by 2030 and plans to build a base on the lunar surface. On Wednesday, Deputy Director Lin reiterated that objective, saying the goal of landing Chinese people on the moon by 2030 will be realized as scheduled. China's first astronauts were all former Air Force pilots, but selection has been widened in recent years and it began selection for its 4th group of space travelers. China is looking for candidates with doctoral degrees in disciplines from biology, physics and chemistry to biomedical engineering and astronomy. It is also opening the process to applicants from Hong Kong, Macau, and for the first time. Beijing will also soon begin the selection and training process for foreign astronauts looking to participate in joint flights to the Tiangong, a senior official on China's crewed space program said earlier this year. Applicants will require to be fluent in Mandarin, which is the working language of the Tiangong. Now, Israel-Palestine conflict again. The United Nations Security Council has failed to take action on the Israel-Hamas conflict in spite of worsening humanitarian crunch in the Palestinian enclave of Gaza. On Wednesday, Russia and China vetoed the United States resolution that called for a humanitarian halt to let humanitarian aid access the protection of civilians and a stop to arming Hamas and other armed groups in the Gaza Strip. A rival text put forward by Moscow then failed to draw up enough support. The US had toned down the first draft release over the weekend after diplomats voiced shock at its failure to recognize the humanitarian crisis and its bold statement that Israel had a right to defend itself. US Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, told the 15-member council after the Russian and Chinese veto, which she described as disappointing. "We did listen to all of you, though today's vote was a setback. We must not be deterred." 10 members voted for the resolution, while the United Arab Emirates voted no, and Brazil and Mozambique refrained. It was a sporadic step by the US to suggest Security Council action, but diplomats noted that a humanitarian halt was not the same as a ceasefire, which has been backed by the Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres. A pause might last only a matter of hours. The draft does not reflect the world's strongest calls for a ceasefire, an end to the fighting, and it does not help resolve the issue, China's United Nations Ambassador Zhang Jun told the Council after the vote. At this moment, ceasefire is not just a diplomatic term, it means the life and death of many civilians. The Security Council voted on a Russian-drafted text that called for a humanitarian ceasefire and withdrawal of Israel's order for civilians in Gaza to relocate south ahead of a ground assault after the failure of the U.S. resolution. It was Russia's second trial at a resolution, but the effort secured only 4 votes. Its first attempt on October 16th received the support of 5 council members. UAE Ambassador Lan Nusaybe, who supported the Russian resolution, said the Security Council needed to respond tangibly to the dire situation in Gaza. The elected 10 members of the Security Council now plan to work on a new draft resolution. Malta's United Nations Ambassador Vanessa Frazier said on October 18th, a Brazilian drafted resolution put forward was vetoed by the U.S., which said it did not do sufficient to stress Israel's right to self-defense. Russia and the United Kingdom abstained. Amidst the Council deadlock, the 193-member United Nations General Assembly will vote on Friday on a draft resolution put forward by Arab states and others calling for a quick ceasefire. No country holds a veto in the General Assembly, and while its resolutions are non-binding, they carry political weight. Israel has said it wants to wipe out Hamas, which controls Gaza, in retaliation for an October 7th attack in which the group killed 1,400 people and took at least 200 captives. Israel has imposed a siege in Gaza and subjected its 2.3 million people to relentless bombing. Palestinian authorities say over 6,500 people have been killed since the war began. Now, in the northeastern state of Maine in the United States, no less than 22 people have been reportedly killed and as numerous as 60 injured after a gunman went on a shooting spree. 2 law enforcement officials in the city of Lewiston said on condition of anonymity that the death toll from the attack was likely to rise. Police first received calls after a shooter at a bowling alley where children's event was taking place. A short time later, another shooting hit a nearby bar and grill. A third shooting was reported at a Walmart distribution center shortly after 8 p.m. Sirens bellowed throughout town following reports of a possible fourth shooting around 9 p.m. Law enforcement authorities cautioned residents to stay indoors and lock doors. State and police and local police said hundreds of officers were searching for the suspects who remained at large. They did not say how many people had been killed or hurt. About 39,000 people live in Lewiston. The Lewiston Police Department released a photo on Facebook page of a person of interest named as Robert Card. Card should be considered armed and dangerous. They were urging members of the public not to approach him or make contact. The state police report said he had been trained as a firearms instructor at the U.S. Army Reserve Training Center in Maine, but had a history of mental health problems, including hearing voices. The 40-year-old spent 2 weeks in a mental health facility during the summer, the report said. Meanwhile, Russia's military has conducted a massive reciprocal nuclear strike exercise hours after the upper house of parliament voted to revoke the country's approval of a global ban on nuclear testing. The drill, which involved the test launch of missile from a land-based silo, a nuclear submarine, and from long-range bomber aircraft, was overseen by President Vladimir Putin. Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and Armed Forces Chief Valery Gerasimov briefed Putin via video link. Comrade Supreme Commander-in-Chief Shoigu said, addressing the president, he said the purpose of the drills was to practice dealing a massive nuclear strike with strategic offensive forces in response to a nuclear strike by the enemy. The exercise comes 20 months since Russia started its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and with Putin and Russian officials giving mixed signals about the possible use of nuclear weapons. Russia, which has the world's largest nuclear arsenal, has moved rapidly in recent weeks to cancel its ratification of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, CTBT, in a move Moscow says it's needed to bring it into line with the United States, which has signed but never ratified the treaty. Wednesday's unanimous passage of the bill through the upper house means it now requires only Putin's signature to take effect. The CTBT outlaws all nuclear explosions, including live tests of nuclear weapons. In addition to the US, it is also yet to be ratified by China, India, Pakistan, North Korea, Israel, Iran, and Egypt. The The Kremlin, in a statement, said a Yars intercontinental ballistic missile was fired from a test site at a target in Russia's Far East. A nuclear-powered submarine launched a ballistic missile from the Barents Sea, and a T-9 long-range bombers test-fired air-launched cruise missiles. Footages of the drill published by the Russian Ministry of Defense showed the land and submarine-based missiles streaking into the night sky, a nuclear-capable bomber aircraft taking off from an airfield under the cover of darkness. Russia carries out such exercises to test its so-called nuclear triad from time to time. The US also carries out regular nuclear drills. There are fears that Russia could move to resume nuclear tests to try to discourage the West from continuing to offer military support to Ukraine. Many Russian hawks have spoken in favor of a resumption of the test. Earlier this month, Putin said he was not ready to say whether Russia needed to carry out live nuclear tests. He has repeatedly invoked Russia's nuclear doctrine since the start of the Ukraine war, saying last year he was not bluffing about his readiness to use destructive weapons should Russia face an existential threat. He has also sent tactical nuclear arms to Belarus, a key ally on the border with Ukraine. Tactical nuclear arms are battlefield weapons that, while devastating, have a smaller yield compared to long-range strategic weapons. On elections matter, Indonesia's constitutional court has been pondering the often globally debated topic of age and whether it matters for political office over the past weeks. Last week, the court had to rule on a legal challenge to reduce the present minimum age for vice presidential and presidential candidates from 40 to 35. The court rejected the case, maintaining that candidates required to be 40 years old to be eligible to run, but they added a caveat. Candidates who had already been elected to public office will be permitted to contest, even if they were under 40 years old. The decision gave way for President Joko Widodo's 36-year-old son, Gibran Rakabuming Raka, the current mayor of Surakarta, to run as vice presidential candidate. The court was also tasked with scrutinizing the upper age limit for candidates after a challenge was filed to exclude those older than 70. That challenge was also rejected, ensuring Prabowo Subianto, a 72-year-old two-time presidential hopeful, and the present defense minister could campaign for the top job. Prabowo and Gibran formally registered as presidential and vice presidential candidates on Wednesday, while Indonesia's constitutional court has ruled neither man is too young nor too old to run the office. The cases have highlighted long-running debates over age and what it means for an individual's capacity for political leadership. A professor of Indonesian law at the University of Sydney Law School, Simon Bott, said, according to reports, that a strong argument against age restrictions for elected office was the constitutional principle of democracy. On February 14th next year, Indonesia will hold simultaneous presidential and legislative elections with some 205 million of the country's 270 million people eligible to vote. The other presidential and vice presidential pairings contesting the election are the former governor of Central Java, Gandhi, Affairs of MD, who is 66, as well as the former mayor of Jakarta, 54-year-old Anies Baswedan, and 57-year-old Muhammad Iskandar, the deputy speaker of the People's Representative Council. More stories on Israel-Gaza conflict. Netanyahu predicts ground incursion. On Wednesday, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, said ground incursion into Gaza will take place and that the present airstrikes were just the beginning, as new satellite images reveal the devastation wrought by Israel's bombs in the besieged enclave. As the humanitarian crisis reaches a critical point in Gaza, with daily airstrikes, life-saving fuel on the verge of running out, and health services paralyzed, pressure is building on the international community to get Israel to permit desperately needed support into Gaza, with more countries advocating for a humanitarian pause, inviting. We are raining down hellfire on Hamas, Netanyahu said on Wednesday evening, while claiming Israel has already eliminated thousands of terrorists, and this is only the beginning. At the same time, we are preparing for a ground incursion, he added, but said the decision on when such action will be taken will be decided by Israel's war cabinet. The Prime Minister also admitted for the first time that he will have to give answers for the intelligence failures that allow the worst terror attack in Israeli history, saying it will be examined fully after the war. Israel has promised to wipe out Hamas, the militant group which controls Gaza, in reaction to its October 7th deadly terror attacks and kidnap rampage in which 1,400 people, mostly civilians, were killed and more than 200 taken hostage. Its reactive air assault on what Israel calls Hamas terror infrastructure has since overwhelmed the densely populated 140 square mile enclave, which had been described by rights group as an open-air prison long before the current war began. New satellite images released by Maxa, taken on October 21st, showed noteworthy destruction to sites across northern Gaza, with the whole neighborhoods flattened in eastern Beit Hanun, and similar devastation near the Al-Shati refugee camp, Atatra and Isbat bin Hanun. Now, France offers naval aid to Gaza. On Wednesday, President Emmanuel Macron of France declared that his country will send a naval vessel to assist Gaza's devastated hospitals in the face of Israel's ongoing bombardment and blockade. Macron revealed that the ship will depart from Toulon within the next 48 hours with the main task of providing crucial aid to Gaza's healthcare facilities. He shared this decision during a joint press conference in Cairo held alongside Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. France, moreover, will also be sending a plane loaded with vital medical supplies to Egypt, which will then facilitate the transport of those crucial materials into the embattled Palestinian territory. In an environment marked by intensifying hostilities between Israel and Hamas, President al-Sisi during the press conference stated the urgent need to stop a ground invasion of the Gaza Strip. He stressed that such an incursion will inevitably result in a high number of civilian casualties. Al-Sisi underscored that over 6,000 civilian fatalities had already been reported in connection with the Israeli airstrikes, and alarming, closely half of those casualties were children. Macron's visit to Egypt followed his recent stop in Israel, where he expressed support for the Israeli military's retaliatory actions against Hamas. On October 7th, Hamas militants carried out the deadliest attack in Israel's history, targeting southern areas of the country and resulting in the loss of more than 1,400 lives, the majority of whom were civilians, according to Israeli authorities. In the weeks since this first attack, a persistent campaign of Israeli airstrikes in Gaza under the control of Hamas has led to the tragic deaths of over 6,500 individuals, the majority of whom were civilians, as reported by the Hamas-controlled Health Ministry in the Palestinian territory. Additionally, during his tour, Macron visited the occupied West Bank for discussions with Mahmoud Abbas, president of the Palestinian Authority. Let's take a quick break, and when I come back, I'll bring you more stories from Nigeria. Don't go anywhere. You're welcome back. Now, zoom on Nigeria with judicial matters. Today, Supreme Court concludes Tinubu's election case. Today, Thursday, the Supreme Court is set to bring down the curtain on the legal rules over the outcome of the 25th February presidential poll, as it will deliver the final judgment on the two appeals challenging the victory of President Bola Tinubu at the disputed poll. Atiku Abubakar of the People's Democratic Party (PDP) and Peter Obi of the Labour Party, the two leading opposition candidates at the election, had filed separate appeals to challenge the earlier 6 September judgment of the Presidential Election Petition Court, which affirmed Tinubu's victory. Today's verdict will be the closing court decision on the disputes over the election. It will mark the end of a two-stage judicial battle, the first part of which was decided by the Presidential Election Court in favor of Tinubu, which was for the challenge at the Supreme Court. The court will now give the final say on the validity of Tinubu's election. Nigeria's Electoral Commission (INEC) had declared Tinubu the winner of the election on 1st March. Atiku and Obi, who came second and third respectively, however, questioned INEC's conduct of the polls as the allegedly widespread electoral fraud and the ineligibility of Tinubu and Vice President Kashi Shettima to vie for the presidency. Dissatisfied, the pair headed to the Supreme Court, the final arbiter on the presidential election dispute in Nigeria. where they asked the court to set aside the Presidential Election Court decision on account of miscarriage of justice. On Monday, a 7-member panel of the Supreme Court headed by John Okoro heard Atiku and Obi's appeals and set them down for judgment. At the final hearing of the case on Monday, Atiku's lawyer Chris Uche offered new evidence before the Supreme Court to prove his client's case against the president. The Supreme Court will decide in its judgment today whether the fresh evidence critical to Atiku's case is legally acceptable and can be reviewed as part of evidence submitted by a party. Specifically, Atiku, through his lawyer Chris Uche, accused Tinubu of forgery concerning the president's academic records from the Chicago State University CSU. After a rigorous suit in the United States, Atiku obtained the academic records, which he has now filed at the Supreme Court to prove his forgery allegation, which was rejected by the Presidential Election Court against Tinubu. On his part, Obi's lawyer, Livy Uzoku, urged the Supreme Court to nullify the Presidential Election Court decision and declare Obi the winner of the election. However, the president's lawyer, Wole Olanipekun, INEC's lawyer, Abubakar Mahmood, and APC's Akin Olujimi asked the Supreme Court to dismiss the appeals and affirm Tinubu's victory. The court subsequently fixed Thursday for the judgment. Still on the news, Tinubu unveils 2024 Remembrance Day emblem. On Wednesday, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu unveiled the emblem for the 2024 Armed Forces Remembrance Day, announcing his approval of 18 billion naira for the group life insurance benefits and other entitlements for families of fallen heroes of the Nigerian Armed Forces. Speaking during the ceremony in the council chambers of the presidential villa in Abuja, he promised that the country would defeat all security challenges facing it. He also said that all security agencies will be moved to make them more effective, even as he praised them for the successes they have recorded so far in the effort to secure the country. NDDC Minister reiterates commitment to secure Nigerian borders. Tinubu appoints new resident electoral commissioners in 9 states. Tinubu stressed that the priority of his government is to provide a favorable environment free from all forms of threats for everyone to perform their legitimate activities in the country. He called on businesses in the country to support them by giving preferential treatment and offering discounts and rebates on goods and services to them. The president also noted that the men, women, and officers of the armed forces have invested and sacrificed much to preserve the nation's unity, and charged all to see it as an obligation to jealously guard the unity bought with the lives and blood of the fallen heroes. He praised the state governors for the support they have steadily given to the Nigerian Legion in their various states, even as he challenged federal and state government agencies and parastatals to continue to patronize the veterans and the families of their fallen comrades. The Minister of Defense, Abubakar Badaru, while speaking, noted the efforts so far made by the administration to restore peace, order, and security to every part of the country and the successes they have been achieved. He regretted that several members of the armed forces had lost their lives while others sustained varying degrees of injuries. And finally, on the news, IPPIS is FG to remove unverified workers. The federal government says it will remove unconfirmed civil servants from its payroll after the ongoing Integrated Personnel and Payroll Information System IPPIS verification exercise by October 27th. On Wednesday in Abuja, Director Communication, Office of the Head of the Civil Service of the Federation, HOCSF, Mohammed Ahmed, made this known in a statement. The federal started the implementation of the IPPIS in 2007 with a view to attaining transparency, accuracy, safety, and reliability in the management of personal records. The initiative was also intended to curb avoidable excesses in personnel costs. According to reports, the federal government had in September delisted over 17,000 government employees from the IPPIS platform for failing to comply with a verification exercise spanning over 5 years before additional 2-week grace was granted for the unverified offices. Ahmed said the office of the HOCSF, being the repository of official records and information on all public servants, was saddled with the responsibility of cleansing the record on the payroll system. He explained that office of the HOCSF had conducted chains of verification exercises which Some civil servants were unable to get captured. Consequent upon this, the director explained that some of the Air officers besieged the office of the HOCSF with pleas to be given the last opportunity to comply. To refresh our memories, China's youngest astronauts launch into space. United Nations Security Council rejects 2 Gaza peace proposals. 22 dead, dozens injured in main mass shooting. Russia holds extensive nuclear retaliation drills, and Indonesia readies for February 2024 polls. That's all on the news. Thanks for watching. I am Lois Suraki.